Everyone. Welcome to Broadband Breakfast live online for Wednesday, September 20th, 2023. I'm Drew Clark, and we are very excited. Apologize for the unusual start. We've done a switch from a Zoom meeting to a Zoom webinar, so that occasions a very slight change in our manner here of being that we'll have to troubleshoot on a little bit more. But we're so excited to have so many of you here in this webcast. This is our regular weekly Broadband Breakfast live online webcast. It is available for free for all of you to attend, and will continue to be. Please come to our weekly program and see what topics. And we've got a great lineup that you can see on Broadband Breakfast live online, or I should say broadbandbreakfast.com. If you just click on the free events, and you can see the upcoming events. We've got a great schedule that's happening over the next few weeks. I won't go through it now because we're getting the team together here. We now have all of our three panelists for today's program, but I want to say just a few more words about today and about tomorrow. By now, most of you know that we are doing a special in-person event, the BEAD Implementation Summit. That stands for Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program, which I'm sure everyone here knows, but so we all know. And it's going to be a great event, we believe. We're excited to be hosting this event at Clydes of Gallery Place. We still have very limited number of slots available. If you'd like to attend in person, registration is $245. Just go to broadbandbreakfast.com and the right special events tab. Just click on that and look for BEAD Implementation Summit. I'm going to talk just a bit about what to expect, because that's, of course, what we're talking about today is what to expect at the BEAD Implementation Summit. But by way of introduction, I wanted to highlight that not everyone can come to Washington, and because of that, we are very, very pleased to be able to offer a live stream of tomorrow's event. And that live stream is available for only $35. And unless you're with the state broadband office, just email me. We'll make sure you get included in that complimentary webcast for state broadband offices. But for everyone else, it's $35, and we certainly hope you'll consider that well worth your time and money to be at this event. And let me just go ahead and highlight for everyone's benefit what we're going to be talking about at the BEAD Implementation Summit. This is, of course, the URL for the event. We've got the director of the BEAD program, Evan Feynman, is giving the luncheon keynote address. And so he'll be able to really go in deep detail and in depth in a way that maybe hasn't done in other comments about where we stand on the BEAD process. And as state broadband offices have obviously received the allocation amounts now nearly 3 months ago, but we're just in this process. We're creeping over to the tipping point of states having done their initial proposals that go into greater detail. And of course, today, or I should say tomorrow, the program sort of starts. In fact, I kind of regard them as the start and end of the program, the state broadband leaders, the state broadband officers. And we're going to begin with a roundtable of state broadband leaders. Tomorrow, we'll be speaking with officials from North Carolina, New Jersey, Maine, Arkansas, and Illinois. I think that's 3 or 4 times. Well, maybe it's two time zones. But in any case, we have a good diversity of states who will be there, and they are, of course, the key part of the BEAD puzzle, in my opinion. But there are other parts too, and so we lead from panel 1 with state broadband leaders to our panel 2, which is going to review the precursor programs to BEAD, the American Rescue Plan Act and its Capital Projects Fund, the Middle Mile Deployment Program of NTIA, the Reconnect program of USDA. All of these are part of the landscape and really can't be ignored. And we can't just speak of BEAD in isolation. That's why we're having folks from the Treasury Department and the Agriculture Department and Virginia, another state broadband officer, Dr. Tamara Holmes of Virginia, will be speaking that, and she can speak to how Virginia has really leveraged ARPA funds as part of its planning process, and they're one of those 14 states that have, maybe 15 now, that have filed their initial proposals. So we look forward to that, and we also have Joel Daly, as Senior Vice President of Zayo, and he'll be speaking. I mean, Zayo was actually awarded 3 separate middle mile grants, obviously in collaboration with various state and other agencies. But the Zayo projects, I think, are a good place to start if you want to look at the middle mile. We're going to move from that into lunch and our keynote presentation by Evan Feynman, which I've alluded to. And then after lunch, for everyone who's there, of course, we have a discussion of matching funds, public-private, or I should say private sector investments and public-private partnerships. Again, we have another all-star lineup of folks from Kinetic Ventures, a private equity firm, Blair Levin, who in some ways needs no introduction, the head of the National Broadband Plan 14, 15 years ago, Brian Vo of Connect Humanity, Steve Curran of Lehrman Center's Broadband and Communications Infrastructure Practice Group, and that'll be moderated by respected journalist Rob Peguero. And then our last panel is a town hall on Buy America, regulatory compliance, and network deployment. So if you start the program thinking about where we are now, right? We're at the state broadband office stage. What are they doing, right? And then you can kind of like, maybe you take a look backwards, right, where we've been, but then you have to assess, how are we going to get the money to do this? That's where the matching funds come in. And then the final panel of the day is dealing with these problems, these troubles, these challenges. And there are many, right? These include things like letters of credit, right? Buy America rules. Some of those have been addressed or have been dealt with in some ways. Workforce development, supplier diversity, regulatory requirements, rights of way, all key issues. And we've got, again, a great group of people from Encompass, NTCA, Ready.net, Phillips Little to speak to these programs. So this is the program as it's laid out. And since not everyone can make it here, we are going to allow people to come on in via webcast. Now, since we weren't able to kind of facilitate everyone, we wanted to get a couple other states in the picture. And so I'm going to go ahead and share the screen with 3 other state broadband leaders. And thank you, each of you, for being willing to jump into this. I know several of you, if not all of you, will be on the webcast watching and maybe lobbing in questions. We're going to have a hashtag on Twitter or X, hashtag BEAD, that will allow people to pose questions who are watching. But I'm interested in being able to hear the perspective that these 3 leaders bring, and I've had the opportunity to interview 2 of them in Ask Me Anything sessions. But let's kind of go in the order that we'll go today. We're going to start with Brian Newby, who is the director of the North Dakota Broadband Program. And thank you, Brian, for being a part of this discussion. You've certainly had an interesting background serving as the state election director in the North Dakota Secretary of State's office. And you also were, of course, the executive director of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. So you kind of bring a broad perspective that you've brought into the broadband world. I don't know much about the North Dakota project, so I look forward to learning a little bit about that. Let's give you 3 to 5 minutes, Brian, to just kind of set the stage. But really, what would you say if you were here tomorrow? Okay, I guess that's, or what are you looking to get? What questions would you like to be asked of the other state broadband leaders from those states that I mentioned who will be here? So in just a moment, I'll turn it to you, Brian, to speak for 3 to 5 minutes before we kind of have an open round robin with questions from myself and from all of our participants. Following Brian, we're going to hear from Jim Stritzinger. And Jim, I've of course loved the conversation we had. We really geeked out, I thought, on some of the broadband mapping, broadband speed issues. And Jim, of course, is the director of the Broadband Office, which is part of the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff, and he manages the full-time team of 5 and is responsible for the rapid deployment of broadband statewide and overseeing $1 billion in state and federal grant investments. So we want to hear more about your thoughts and your questions too, Jim, that you would be asking others. Again, if you were here, able to be here in Washington with us. And then batting cleanup is Christine Hall, and in some ways, Christine needs no introduction. She brings an incredible wealth of experience in the utility space. Before becoming the executive director of the Vermont Community Broadband Board, Christine's mission Christine was the former CEO of the Vermont Electric Cooperative, which I think is either the largest or second largest utility provider in the state. You can kind of correct me or flesh that out, but definitely one of the major electric utility players in the state. And coming from that perspective of a utility provider, Christine really kind of sees that importance of broadband and the role of broadband in it. And again, we did an Ask Me Anything as well. That was a lot of fun. Thank you for being part of that, Christine. And we look forward to your brief thoughts here after we hear from Brian and Jim. So I'll pass it over to you, Brian, to take it away. Thank you for being here with us, and let's hear from you on your thoughts on this topic.
Well, thank you, everybody, for having me on here. And I'm probably the poser out of the 3 of the panelists here, because today is my official 6-month time on the job since I've been here, and which I guess in dog years is almost 4 years. But the department in general, the whole program was started by someone named Kevin Sievert, who's on this call today. And he was kind of a one-man band, and now we're, I guess, a 2-man show. We're using Guidehouse as a big provider for us as contractor. But here in North Dakota, the thing really for us is that the LECs, the ISPs, and also a major cable company in Midco have done such a great job of getting broadband to people that we've got basically 10,000 or fewer service locations that we need to address. And so we are in a position where we believe that we have sufficient funds to do that. Now, if you listen to, the FCC map, it's 10,000. If you listen to some of the carriers, it may be closer to 500. We've got to get to that first number, the current state, so we can get to the next state. And that's a thing we're going through right now. But one of the things that even in the money is become clear to me is that it was allocated, at this point now, a year ago, even though we just found out what it was, but we kind of had an idea. But it was allocated a year ago, and by the time it's in the hands of providers, it'll be 2-year-old numbers. And so if you look at the cost, just the net present value, we probably, even though we had 130 million, 5 million off for admin, 125, that's probably in real terms, that's probably about 110 million that we have when you get down to it. And then when you take the length of the time that's all going to be implemented, I think the cost value of the capital is going to be a big thing that people will be starting to see. And I know that there are other issues that Jim and Christine have. I mean, we're lucky that they are going through these things so that hopefully they will knock down doors before we get there in terms of permitting, some of the letters of credit, some of those aspects. One of the things, though, that we ponder a lot is because we have so few locations, because the carriers have done such a great job, we think, our carriers want to be first. And I'm just going to share one slide on the screen, and this, I think, will work, hopefully.
Works. Go ahead.
Hey,
yeah.
So in essence, how do you determine what being first means? And, there's different ways to do that, looking at funding, looking at having your location served. I kind of think that having your location served is kind of like laundry. You're never done with laundry. You're probably never going to be truly at 100%, but you would be in some aspect. And so one of the things that we're starting to really want to educate with our legislators here in North Dakota is there are probably different ways to peel the onion here. There are probably different ways to determine who's first. And with such a rabid interest in being first in North Dakota, we want to make sure that we're not set up for some disappointment if other states kind of, because they're farther ahead in the process, perhaps can fund before we can. That may be one definition of first, but that's definitely an aspect, but something we're trying to consider as well when we talk to our legislators and our stakeholders here. I know you got a lot to talk about, so I'll kind of stop there, but I just wanted to now the trick is to figure out how to stop sharing, but I'll stop that and somehow and let you go back to your panel there.
Thank you very much, Brian. Great to hear from you. And you know, there's one unfortunate fact I have to share, that I've been to 47 of the 48 continental United States, and I have never been to North Dakota. So I'm going to have to make a point to come up and get on that highway above. Is it the highway above 90 that you need to get to get, or does 90 go through North Dakota? Does I-90?
I actually have only lived here 4 years and I haven't gone on the highways, but the one day of summer is really nice. So I would target coming then. We have lots of daylight. It's really wild, and I would not recommend coming in the winter, but in the summer we have days where it doesn't get dark till about 11 at night. It's just really beautiful. Yeah. It's a terrific place to be in the summertime.
Okay, well, thank you again, Jim. Let's hear from you. Tell us a little bit about what's on the mind of the South Carolina Broadband Office.
Well, Drew, it's great to join you again and get to chat live. And I got to say first, you know, one of the really cool inside baseball things about being a broadband director is I get to be friends with Brian and Christine, and I think we've all learned from each other. That's one of the really cool things is we can compare notes on a lot of things. The way I like to describe it is I think each state broadband director has a superpower. You know, some are really good at one element, some are really good at another element of this whole BEAD thing. And when we get together, most recently in Indianapolis, it's really, really fun to compare notes and do deep dive on really nuanced items. So yeah, we're good friends. I mean, the 56 of us now, I think we all pretty much know each other on a personal basis. And it's really a beautiful thing. Specific to South Carolina, it's an exciting time. I should stop first and make sure I say thank you to all the internet service providers out there. We know, I think I can speak for Christine and Brian, that, you know, we don't connect a single home. We don't bury a single mile of fiber. We count on the ISPs to do all of that stuff. So we get the benefit of getting to keep score. I love putting points up on the board, so to speak, but the ISPs are really doing the hard work and the stuff. You know, the thing that motivates me, keeps me up at night, is thinking about 6-year-olds that don't have broadband. I really think that's our future generation, and it really keeps us moving quickly. I have an extraordinary team here. We are blessed with incredible technical talent on the GIS side in particular, and we've done some really innovative things. We are, you know, Brian mentioned he's sitting around 10,000 locations that he's targeting. We've remapped the whole state based on underserved criteria. So we have moved so rapidly. We're closing in on getting 25.3 done. We've been able to move rapidly on our ARPA. So we remapped the state this past March at 100/20. We raised the bar, and based on our investments that we've already placed, we're sitting at 133,000 broadband serviceable locations remaining in South Carolina. And then we've got still quite a bit of American Rescue Plan dollars to get deployed. And so kind of our goal is summer next year is to have ARPA out the door so that we are getting ready and sequence BEAD in right at, just as we're running out of ARPA money. That's the ideal timing for South Carolina to have BEAD money begin flowing. And that's a big topic. I think if there was a tip or a trick I'd offer everybody as you're looking at state broadband office, make sure you understand where each state is in their ARPA mission. there's all this talk about BEAD, but guess what? We just, in our case alone, we still have about 225 million of American Rescue Plan money to be deployed, and it's very significant. And then I'll just, on the mapping side, one of the coolest things we're doing, Drew, is we're paying attention very carefully to areas that we funded. And of course, we don't want to double invest any money, but we're also doing some really innovative stuff on the back end. The thing that makes me sweat at night is the complication of, if we fund a project and then it goes south, for whatever reason, it does not go live, the fear of getting clawed back is a very real material fear for all of us. And so we're doing some really unique things. And I definitely want to give a shout out to IBM and Ookla. We've been working on really a real-time data intelligence coming in from Ookla. So I'm actually getting it now, real-time speed tests. When I wake up in the morning, I see what happened the previous day. And our idea is to have a dashboard for the state of South Carolina, so you can see at a pretty granular level. We're going to use those Hex 8 hex bins to show where in the state construction happened last week. So wow. I think that's going to be a really neat thing. We'll be having fun showing that off later in the year, but it's an exciting time. And again, thanks to everybody that's helping us, make a reality in South Carolina. It's an exciting mission and an honor to be a broadband director for sure.
Well, and maybe we'll have a chance to come back to some of those other issues, but very exciting to hear about this real-time capacity and what you've just described. Christine, tell us a little bit about some of the core issues you're facing. And I apologize for not remembering. You are one of the states that has filed your initial proposal, as I now recall, and you made a change to the NTIA's proposed plan. Could you, again, speak about whatever you want, but that's a question I'd like you to address at some point.
Oh, sure. And Jim, I'll reiterate, my appreciation and thanks for all of your support throughout we're veterans now, but as well as the new folks bringing in the fresh blood. I wanted to start with a positive story as well. When I was the CEO of Vermont Electric Co-op, I had a picture in the corner of the room. It was the first electric utility pole that was set by cooperatives in Eden Mills, Vermont, in 1939. And there were all these men, women, and children setting that pole by hand. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it have been a wonderful time to live back then, to be so unified around such an important goal of getting electricity to every address in rural America. And wouldn't it be nice to live in those times? And I must say, I pinch myself every day because that's what we're all doing today. And it's so exciting. I can't think of anything else I'd rather be doing. So that said, Vermont's had a long focus. I personally started working on broadband for rural Vermonters in 2003. We've, went through every technology possible. And if you look at the key technologies like wireless, Vermont has a serious challenge of propagation with wireless because of our mountains and our foliage. And of course, trying to serve broadband with copper DSL is like tilling your garden with a teaspoon. So, we've set a goal. Our legislature started working on this in 2019 to set a goal to get fiber to every home and address. So we formed communication union districts, and there's 10 of those. Now, I want to make it clear that, we're not doing all community-owned networks. Any of the grant funds are going to support a community-owned network. But the only way we're going to accomplish getting every address connected to fiber optic internet is by working in partnership with our private providers. And that's exactly what we're doing. As I testified in legislature several years ago, it'd be $1.2 billion to do that if we were trying to do that with community networks, but we can do it for $550 million if we work cooperatively. That number is now $630 million, but we also have plenty of grant funding to get it done. And I'm proud to say that our first CUD just 2 days ago announced 100% of their 20,000 subscribers are connected fiber optic internet. And so our goal and our measurement is fiber optic connections. 2021, about 19% of Vermont was connected. 2022, it was about 30%, and by the end of this year, we'll hit 40%. So we're well on our way, and things will really step up because the CUDs are in construction, full construction as of this year. So what are the challenges? You know, we talk about wireless. When you talk about that change, we put in that we do not want to count wireless as served. So we're not sure where that's going to go, but we're also putting a program in place that even if it's that our challenge program is also going to address those issues if that's not accepted by the NTIA. That was in our version 1 submission, which we submitted last week. So, but one of the biggest concern, I will tell you what the biggest concern we're focused on right now is affordability. And if you look at what's happening with trying to serve these rural customers, it's very expensive to serve them because they've been picked over naturally because they don't have a business case. So if you look at average revenue per unit of $100 for each one of these passings, you know, that affordability becomes a real challenge. And then the NTIA is saying, oh, well, you need to come up with an affordability program. Well, the only way you can do that to fund low income and make it a sustainable program is to be charging more on the high end. Of course, when you get over $100 ARPU, your take rate starts dropping off significantly. So we have to be careful with developing these business plans and addressing affordability. If you look at affordability in the rural areas we're trying to serve, it's more than double the number of low-income folks as that's in our areas that are served today. And those areas that are served at an average cost of $1,500 an address versus the $10,000 an address in the rural areas, we get this unusual situation where we have to have low-income people subsidizing other low-income people. So there's a real flaw in the affordability plans when really if this was addressed as a statewide issue or a national issue, it would be a much more fair way to approach it.
Well, thank you for the summary and for explaining what you've done with the difference, right, on wireless and how you're not considering that served. I'm sure we'll have some comments on that. We do have some questions, and we want to continue to invite your questions. I ask you to put them in the Q&A. We did enable chat for, as I said earlier on, we kind of moved from a meeting to a webinar, and I did get some feedback. Oh, the problem with that is that you can't communicate with others, and so we did enable that in the chat. But I may be regretting that if you don't put them in the questions, because now I have to look at 2 different places for questions. So I'm going to go with the questions first in the Q&A, and feel free to ask them. Again, we're excited that we're going to have even more state broadband officers at the BEAD Implementation Summit, and you can sign up and watch the webcast. But let's hear first from this question from Mike McCarthy, and he specifically references North Dakota. So he says that Obama's BTOP, the Broadband Technology Opportunity Program, provided $10 million to North Dakota for broadband deployment. Is there anything North Dakota can teach us about deploying fiber via BEAD? I haven't been to this link that Mike has provided in there, but if you want to take that question, Brian, I'm not sure if there's a specific reference to North Dakota, but what do you think about fiber as a deployment technology?
Well, I think that our view is that fiber is the way to go, but at least in terms of the unserved locations. I think that we're looking and trying to learn from what other states are doing with the definition, the views of fixed wireless, and obviously are aware that we've got a lot of fixed wireless in the state that is serving customers well as well. So how we address that, I think is something we still are trying to figure out. What I don't quite get, and I've struggled some with, is if you aren't at fiber and if you're looking at other technologies because of someone's not bidding or it's extremely high cost, I don't know what say a satellite company, for instance, what that really looks like when you're trying to say that you're going to serve a location, because it seems like the only thing you can really do is pay for it for a certain amount of time, and then it's not going to be an answer longer term, if you're going to buy CPE or something. So I think our hope is that we can just do it all with fiber. That's with the unserved and hit the underserved and do it all fiber. We think we have the money to do that, but that really remains to be seen right now.
Okay. Why don't we get other people's perspectives on this fiber question, fiber versus not fiber? Obviously, the NTIA has put forth its guidelines about, satellites not part of the program, as I understand it. Maybe there's an exception I've missed there, but what Christine has mentioned is kind of going further and saying in the specific environment of your community, you're not going to consider fixed wireless to be served. Jim, what is your approach to the kind of technology question, and how do you kind of manage or navigate that one?
Well, Drew, I think there's two sides to this. One, I like to call it a wireless bridge to a wired future. I think is a good way to refer to it. And by that, I mean, we're a big fan of wireless technology. If you can connect a home now versus waiting 2 years, that's a good thing. But by the same token, BEAD is very prescriptive in the deployment of fiber. And we don't want a wireless connection to block somebody from ultimately getting fiber. So that's kind of what I mean. If you can get a wireless connection up and going now, and activate that 6-year-old child so that they can do their homework now, that's a great thing. And that's kind of how we're approaching it. But yes, the BEAD is very, very prescriptive that fiber is the preferred technology. And I know, Christine, we talked a lot about this in the hallway at, and Brian as well. Fiber is also the platform by which we fix a lot of other stuff. We can fix cell phone service. Let's not forget, the reason cell phones don't work in rural America is the fact that we don't have backhaul in a lot of rural America. And, you can't just build a new cell tower and expect it to work. So if we get fiber in the right spots, not only are we fixing residential connectivity, but we're providing that future platform to fix 5G and 4G and everything else in the rural community. So I really do think we need to be fiber forward, but not close our eyes. And this whole thing called the extremely high cost threshold, that is something that's very prescribed in the BEAD NOFO, which allows a state to switch from fiber to a different technology when the cost gets too much. And there are certainly some homes that are best suited for Starlink. And there's also some homes, Brian, I know we talked about this, there's also some people that just don't want internet. They want to be left alone. They like it. But I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Brian, do you want to add anything?
Well, I thought there was even some statistic just recently that if you added up, I think I'm trying to remember what state it was in, and I want to say it was Indiana, that showed, I think it was Purdue, pretty sure it was Purdue. I could just have this totally wrong, but they had kind of little bands. I saw some infographic and it showed the different reasons why people don't have internet. And it wasn't, it was single reason, so you couldn't add it up being cumulative. But looking at that research, looking at some stuff the NTIA did, we like to think that its affordability is the obstacle, which I'm not disagreeing with, but there is a large percentage of people, if you read the research, maybe even as much as half, who don't have internet because they just don't see their need to have it. I have some personal anecdotes from, family members in that same situation. And so I need it. I have as a simple example, I have a new treadmill that will not work, I discovered, without Wi-Fi, and specifically Wi-Fi that has internet connectivity. So if your Wi-Fi router is working, but you can't get to the internet, your treadmill can't work. Just literally cannot. It's a Bowflex, by the way. I would just want to let people know that that's an issue if you buy it. So if you have a treadmill that you get to run in the wintertime, and you had a fiber issue in the winter that took a while, or a fiber cut or something, it took a while to get that connect back, you literally cannot operate your treadmill. And so I think that people, you look at why they don't have internet, but they will need to have it for more and more reasons just for everyday life. And that's kind of where we focused. I never really would have thought I needed Wi-Fi to operate a treadmill, but here we are.
Yeah, let me add to that too. This comes from my utility experience. I will tell you today that broadband connectivity is even more important than electricity, yet we haven't recognized it. And I say this because A few years back, we had a major storm coming up the East Coast. We were on a call with federal government, federal FEMA out of DC, and they said, we need to prepare for a telecommunications outage. Well, at that point, my staff faces all turned white because we realized, we have such an important system control and data network that's connected by fiber throughout the state, that if we had to go back to the old way of, we would have chased, not even having cell phone service, it would be a serious deadly occurrence. And there's, studies have been doing nationally that show the number of people that would die in a situation like that. So, when we talk about losing fiber service, it really is important when we talk about these middle mile designs to build in the geographic redundancy and build in the resiliency and the internet exchange points to ensure that we have a performance that exceeds the performance of our electric system. And of course, we don't even have the performance measures in place from the FCC to even know how our system's performing, let alone have the designs necessary in order to build that reliability and resiliency.
And Christine, could I just adding to her point, let's all remember that broadband doesn't work if you don't have electricity. So as we're selecting technologies, especially for really low income families and tying in this affordability, if mom and dad are struggling to pay their power bill, guess what? The internet's not going to work and that child won't be able to do their homework. So as you're selecting technologies for, trailer parks, low income situations, deploying subscription Wi-Fi and things like that to make the internet resilient, especially in a low income area, is really, really important to do. But, we can't close our eyes to the whole topic of energy because we're facing, in some cases, rolling energy blackouts across the country as our grid gets. And, to spend all the broadband money and then attack the electric grid on the other side just does not do us any good.
Yeah. So, if I could, I just would even add, we'd like to think that broadband is just tied to computers. And I think, you can get into the Internet of Things or whatever, but we've seen other technologies that have moved behavior. Light bulbs, simple one. EV, cars. They won't run very much in North Dakota's weather, but I think inevitably we're going to be buying them in North Dakota because that's what's going to be available. And I really do think that more and more people who don't see a need for internet, we like to think, well, they don't have a computer, they don't make that kind of thing. But there's the other side of it that everyday life is going to be, you're going to need internet just to operate things in your home. And you're going to need internet just to be able to live. And people who don't have broadband today may not really be seeing that issue, I guess.
So we have a question here from Garland McCoy. He says an ISP challenge about ISP challenges. So how do you validate their data as all data is self-reported data? Furthermore, how can a state or even the NTI perform a real audit of the BEAD program regarding network performance improvement before and after BEAD funding? And I just, Garland frequently is on our program. He's been kind of laser focused on this issue and very interested in your thoughts, in each of your thoughts on the question of measuring and challenging, which is very much in the news right now, even as we speak. So let's start with you, Christine. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on the challenge process and speed tests, and particularly dealing with this issue of self-reported data.
Yeah, that's a really important issue, and I appreciate the question. I appreciate Garland has been laser focused on this. We're in our challenge process, we're going to use Ookla and MLab, because when you measure latency and speed, it depends on the network. Are you measure, one's measures behind the internet exchange point, one includes the transport mechanism. For our providers, of course, we're going to measure behind the internet exchange point because we're not going to have them. We're not going to hold them accountable for the transport mechanism. That's really our problem. But it is all tied together, and we are going to do collective data from speed tests But we're also going to, you have to randomly place hardware devices to verify your data from a statistical standpoint to ensure that you're not just getting the losses from the internet devices that are being used in the home or the modems or those kind of things. So it is important that you design your challenge process to address those issues, the issues of transport fiber beyond the internet exchange point, and the issues of the losses between the home and the ONT, for example. And both those contribute to the customer experience. We're not going to say we're done if we're getting speeds at the ONT. We want to help people address all of the issues that are a part of that stream of data.
Jim, could you address the question of challenges and speed tests and challenges?
Sure. So first of all, let me touch on timing, because I know everybody wants to know, when are BEAD funds going to come available? We think in South Carolina that we're going to run our BEAD challenge in the third quarter next year. That's our best guess as to when we're going to land, which means ARPA will have come off the table. But as we stare at challenges, and Garland and others, one of the things we're really proud of and have innovated on is blending together Ookla speed test data with FCC data when we produce broadband maps. So literally, I tell residents of South Carolina, every time they run a speed test, our maps get smarter. And we blend those into the maps. You can actually see them on scdigitaldrive.org if anybody's interested. But, speed is super important, but candidly, only to a certain level. Once a home goes beyond 100 meg symmetric, really, it's not my problem anymore. We're not in the business of showcasing how fast the ISPs are. We just want to make sure the residents have 100 meg symmetric. So I guess a little bit of a nuance I would add to this is, once we can prove that a house has beyond 100 meg symmetric, that an area has beyond 100 meg symmetric, we kind of move on. And having said that, most of our ISPs, a lot of them have that as the minimum package available to consumers, especially our electric co-ops, and a lot of the cable companies are offering 100 meg symmetric as a standard offering. So we no longer have the excuse of the customer not subscribing to the right level, because in a lot of cases they have it available. So all of those things are helping us, and it's not a bad situation.
Okay. Brian, do you have thoughts? Could you tell us a little bit about the challenge process you have in store?
Well, we're trying to learn from the others again. This is the benefit of really, we're probably in some of these, our proposals will be coming in right in December, and this is the benefit of seeing other people and trying to learn from that. I mean, we're looking at the potential of getting Ookla data as well. I do think that the self-reported thing is kind of a weird thing. And also, though, as you kind of go through and trying to figure out the actual speeds, you do have to be aware that, one of the things that comes into play is customer testimonials. It's not really part of the challenge, but it can be fed into other entities who can challenge. And some of that kind of testimonial may be they just prefer one company over another, or they don't like a company. There's that aspect. They may be attesting to a certain speed that they're actually getting better. So that's one of the things to consider. For us, though, this whole process, what would help us is when we've looked at others in the proposals. Vermont's a great example. We talk to NTIA and say, so how are you going to treat this or that? The categories of fixed wireless as example, and it'd help us if NTIA gave clarity. And so I come from an elections background where we deal with statutes, and it's very specific. And we have a law that led to a NOFO. And I think the more clarity we can get from the NTIA from day one, the better. It feels like we're going to get a lot of exceptions, a lot of requests for waiver opportunities and that kind of thing, which really makes it hard to plan. So the more clarity we can get up front, the better. And that is something I think if I were able, I'm not going to be able to be part of the conversation tomorrow, but that's something I would be asking the NTIA. How can they give us more clarity?
Mhm.
We got a question from Dan Smith in here about, is the FCC speed test app considered to produce valid data? Do any of the three of you want to take that question?
I'll just jump in on that one, Drew. We don't download that data currently. One of the biggest things about speed test data that you have to be careful about is making sure that you have accurate latitude and longitude information flowing through. And when you run a speed test, typically within a browser environment, it's using what's called GeoIP location for a home. So the location is not very precise. So we look very carefully. One of the things that Ookla has been really helpful is when you know that a speed test was run on a GPS enabled device, then you have very accurate location. If it's not, then it could actually, GeoIP, this is a nuance, it actually picks the centroid of a zip code. So if it can't figure out precisely where you are, so you could very easily see a bunch of speed tests stacking up on a single dot inside a zip code, and that's why it does what it does. But you have to be careful about that, and you have to know, it's you got to know what you're doing when you're managing speed test data, because it's not all the same. And
Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to make, and just picking up on Brian's comment, it's legendary that the ISPs report advertised speeds, but they also provide a technology type. And we've been looking at that for years. That's been our central point of focus, is the type of technology that's deployed. And candidly, we've tended to ignore the advertised speeds because they're so wildly overstated. But if I know that a house is hooked to fiber or cable, which we get from the FCC data, odds are pretty good it will meet or exceed the 100/20 threshold. And that's a huge way to optimize your state broadband deployment.
Yeah, I'll just add to what Jim said. I'm not familiar with the FCC speed test and what's behind it, but what Jim said is very important, which is why we look at both MLAD and Ookla. Ookla has the geolocation tag tied to it, but where MLAD goes out and looks at the transport beyond the internet exchange point. So, if you look at the customer experience, you want to know what's happening in the entire ping route. And so, Ookla has its benefits, and so does MLab, but I don't know the physics behind the FCC speed test to say, how they're doing it.
Dan Berkowitz asked this question: do you have a date range on when subgrantees will receive the BEAD fundings in their bank accounts?
I'll jump on that one, and this is specific to South Carolina, but if you just run the dates, all of our initial proposal is due by December 27th. We're guessing that, NTIA has telegraphed to all of us that it'll take them about 90 days to approve the initial proposal. That gives us 20% restricted money. It's not really be able to use for infrastructure. We do subgrantee selection is required to be done within 12 months of IP approval. So that puts us into March of 2025 for South Carolina. And the final approval has to be, or the final proposal has to be approved before we can move a penny of BEAD money. So candidly, I think South Carolina notices to proceed will be sometime in the third quarter of 2025. And the cash will never hit your bank account until you put expenses in. It will be a drawdown reimbursement type program. You're not going to have cash dropping in. I did see that question come in on the on the question.
We also have a question here from Dan Smith, another really good question. If the new connections are owned by a public entity like a state, do the letter of credit requirements still apply? And maybe let me start with you, Christine, because the communications utility districts, as I understand them, are it's actually a municipal entity. So could you speak to both that innovation that we talked a lot about on the Ask Me Anything, but maybe you want to address Dan's question about letter of credit too?
Yeah, unfortunately, a letter of credit still applies. And that's really problematic. If you've been listening to a lot of the discussion nationwide, the letter of credit really negatively impacts our communication union districts, because you talk about these are expensive programs, so if you've got a communication union district that Vermont's a small state, 657,000 people, you got a CUD with maybe 20,000 people that it's going to cost $30 million, and they have to come up with 25%. Municipals just don't have that kind of money. So letter of credit negatively impacts the community networks as well as the small ISPs.
Mm-hmm. We've got another regional question. This is from Doreen Cornwall. I'm going to ask it of you, Brian. It's about telemedicine and folks in rural North Dakota using telemedicine to cut down on travel. Could you just speak to the question? Let's ask it this way. What's the kind of hope you see from applications like telemedicine in your state, Brian, but also, how much flexibility do you as a state broadband office have on specific applications and programs such as telemedicine?
Well, especially early on in BEAD, I don't know that we have too much flexibility because our first focus is getting people connected. But what we've tried to do is kind of our little theme, I guess, if you will, broadband for life, is that really trying to emphasize in our communications efforts that broadband, as I was saying earlier, just a silly question, silly with treadmill, but broadband's needed for everyday life. So it's not for, streaming movies or playing games. It's for the things very critical like telemedicine. And in North Dakota, I mean, even in the more populated areas, and Bismarck's one of the third or fourth, really second largest, maybe even community. Forget telemedicine. I mean, you've got basically a doctor it takes forever to get into just when you don't have to drive, because I think we need more physicians in the state to begin with. But a lot of people then will go several hundred miles to Mayo in Minnesota. So obviously telemedicine would maybe help bridge that some. I don't know that is as much of a gap right now as much as a proof point of what we need to be telling everybody. Because if we only have 10,000 or fewer locations that don't have broadband, I think that capability is already there. For us, it's just really trying to reinforce to everyone that this isn't about maybe fringe or entertainment kind of things as much as it's really about everyday life.
How are each of your states approaching your sub programs? Are you planning to do multiple rounds or not? Jim, this is something we touched on in our Ask Me Anything and your concerns about that. Has there been any clarity on how many rounds you'll be able to do? And I'd love to hear from each of the three officers. Yeah,
just kicking it off, and I'm curious to hear what Christine and Brian are doing too, but just pure timing. Every state, all 56 states and territories have to have their final proposal delivered to the NTIA within 12 months of the initial proposal being approved, which means as it's currently written, all 56 entities need to have their complete subgrantee selection done. Because of where we are, there's impossible for us to do 2 rounds. We're going to do 1 round and get it out, and then we'll have to put together our subgrantee list. But it's really, really hard to deploy $551 million in our case in 12 months. In other states that are much larger allocations than ours, I don't know how they're going to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Jim summarized it for us. That's exactly how we're approaching it. Yeah, we just don't have time to do 2 rounds.
And I think for us, we're still trying to figure out that and learn from others still same way again. But for us, we definitely know we're going to probably need to do some sort of RFI process to even find out who's going to bid. And so I get it. If the more money you have, the harder it is to get it distributed through more than 1 round. But I was already thinking that we needed to look at more than 1 round because the other side of it, I'm concerned that there will be several locations that just won't be bid on. And I think the carriers forget, the letter of credit's one thing, that's a huge thing, but just in general, maybe they can't afford the free money. And I think that is a real issue. And if we wake up and we only have 50% of our locations even get bids, I don't know what we have as any other alternative than to try and do more rounds.
Yep.
Right.
And Brian, we just learned yesterday, working with NTIA directly, that if the fair and open competitive process only has to happen one time. Once you've done your bids, if you have remaining locations, the broadband office is free to reach out and negotiate directly with ISPs to solve specific geographies. So that's important to know, that you can maneuver that way after you've run your challenge.
So we've got a lot of questions come in on our other platforms too. I'm gonna try to stack these three and give each of the three of you a chance to respond to any or all of these as you're kind of and then add any closing thoughts you'd like. So we'll go in the same order we started. These are the three questions from David Clark. Does the hardware for BEAD projects have to be made in the USA? Okay, and obviously that's a big issue we haven't talked a lot about, but there are some answers on that. And then Jim Couples asks, what is the plan by state broadband offices to settle a disagreement between two ISPs that self-report conflicting numbers, so conflicting ISPs? And then a third from Dan Berkowitz, did the NTIA change the requirements for BEAD to be implemented by the end of 2028? So a lot of questions there. Brian, do you want to take any of those three?
Well, I think the first thing on the equipment, and I know there's people who know much more about it than us. My view, again, kind of going back to elections, when we used to prepare election administrators for elections, we try to think about what they were going to be looking at 45 days from that point, so 90 days out. The equipment is a real thing for us, but it's something that I'm hoping by others plowing ahead before us, it'll be much more obvious as we get going. I haven't heard about the deadline extending for BEAD. I don't know that I have an opinion about that. I have to confess I've missed the second question of the three.
It was about settling conflicts between two ISPs.
Well, I mean, I think I will get back to the clarity from NTIA. I thought that was really good what Jim just said a minute ago, so that's good to know. But the thing we hear from NTIA is that whatever we have in our challenge process, they're going to stand behind. I hope that's the case, because in the end, one of the issues here is this is obviously we're all talking nuts and bolts, but this is a political thing. And so when you have those disagreements, you have something laid out in your challenge process, that should address that. And that's what we're hoping. But we're not blind to the fact that there's a political element here, and whether that's cover from people here in North Dakota, cover from NTIA, we need whatever decisions are agreed upon by everyone, including the carriers, that we have some backstop to that. So that's my biggest concern about that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being with us. Obviously, we'll miss you tomorrow, but we really appreciate you zooming in. Brian, let's hear from you, Jim, and then you, Christine.
I'll extend to the level I'm capable. A lot of these details are unfolding. The BABA requirements, as they're known, the Build America, Buy America. Specific to South Carolina, I know we have two fiber manufacturers in South Carolina, and the way that just for fiber alone, the glass has to be drawn in the United States to count as BABA fiber. And that's going to eliminate two of our manufacturers here in South Carolina. And we're concerned about that. But I think you look at that across the board, that will have a big constriction on the fiber supply chain from where it is currently with ARPA. So I think we got to be mindful of that stuff. As far as shortening the BEAD window, I don't think so. I mean, President Biden stood at the podium, and I know Christine and I got to see that live. And Brian, honestly, I don't remember if you were there, but we had the honor of being in the White House, and President Biden said he wanted every house connected by 2030. And I think that speaks to Brian's point that there's a political driver to this. And I guess lastly thing I'll say is the restrictions on BEAD money are much more significant. The environmental permitting, the state historic preservation permitting, and the other overlays that happen on top of BEAD dollars will make these be longer projects than we're experiencing now with ARPA. But Christine?
Great.
Yeah, I'll just talk about the BABA requirements. There's already been some softening there. The realization that galvanized pole hardware can't be even built there's no, you can't get it in this country. So the NTIA's already softened on that. I think the reality is getting hit hard. You know, I had one company proudly presenting how they're going to build all this stuff in the United States. Like when you talk about lead times versus manufacturing capacity, you know, I got to believe we're going to see some serious issues, but I also got to believe that the top priority is getting everybody connected based, you know, Jim talked about this being a political issue. So we will hit the wall. Probably some of us earlier folks will hit the wall first, but we'll bust right through it.
Well, thank you all for being with us. Of course, we'll miss each of you at Clyde's Gallery Place tomorrow, but feel free to Zoom in. Still opportunity to sign up and attend and hear your questions, and more importantly, try to get some answers on the next phase in the BEAD implementation process. On behalf of Brian Newby, Jim Stritchinger, and Christine Hallquist, I'm Drew Clark. We'll see you tomorrow. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Drew.
Thank you.